Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are viewing a compilation of interviews on the topic of C-suite succession. In this video, we hear from Sean Woodruff, Executive Vice President and Chief People, Culture, and Communications Officer at Lincoln Financial. When we did this interview, he was the CHRO of TIAA. Craig Hademak, CHRO of USIC, and when we did this interview, he was the Senior Vice President and CHRO for Milliken & Company. Monique Harena, who is the Chief Colleague Experience Officer at American Express. Ernest Marshall, CHRO of Eaton. Christian Meisner, CHRO of GE Aerospace, and when we conducted this interview, he was the CHRO of Kaiser Permanente. Lucian Alziari, Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer at Prudential Financial, and Tom Plath, the SVP of HR and Global Citizenship at International Paper.
At our company, we have an ongoing focus on talent review, talent management, and succession planning. We have a process by which we identify successors on a time basis, whether we have ready now successors, we have ready 1 to 3 years successors, we have ready 3+ successors. We engage an outside firm to conduct an assessment of our succession talent to help either validate or in some instances invalidate our own point of view on that talent. And we want to ensure that there is a development plan that is accompanying each identified successor. So it's not simply about listing a successor on a piece of paper, but what development on a targeted, purposeful basis is being contemplated to ensure that that person is well on track to achieve that succession planning goal.
And over the years, I've come to appreciate more and more how important that is as you have expected retirements or unexpected transitions over time. In our case, we actually have a system and a schedule and a series of business reviews where for roughly our top 200 or so positions in the company, we have developed a succession pipeline of folks ready now, ready over the next 5 years, and folks that are long-term potential. And so we have mapped those out. We use that to help us steer development plans, to grow people, to do rotations, to do different experiences. And ideally, you have a lot of that talent is able to go into multiple channels. So they may be qualified to be a CFO, or they might also be qualified to be a business manager. So they can kind of go multiple paths. And so, and the more optionality that a company has with its talent, the better and stronger it is. So definitely HR can help map those items. And you really look, I think the foundation of it is it's not stovepipe talent succession plans, but it's more of a multifunctional pool that can go multiple places across the enterprise, and that talent's more of an enterprise asset than a stovepipe
As
asset.
I can say from my own experience and in talking to a lot of my peers at every company, I can tell you that CEO succession is the responsibility of the board from a process, a day in, day out, coaching, assessment, how you kind of bring the board along and get a lot of input and make sure they kind of fulfill their responsibilities from a governance standpoint. It's such a critical decision. And it needs to be an ongoing, regular conversation. That is the case with our board. We have a fantastic board, a very diverse board, just an amazing board, and we focus a lot of time there. We also focus a lot of time, to your question, specifically on the C-suite. And really, what does the bench look like? What is the depth? What is the quality? What is the quantity? What are we doing to develop and coach and stretch the right people, infuse new talent where we need to? And we have conversations, literally, in our case, every board meeting, many committee meetings. We talk about talent and culture a great deal with our board, and it's because we spend so much time on it, and they realize the importance of it. So I do think there is a role. The way I take up the role I want everyone to be successful on the senior management team. I'm not competing with any of my peers. I want them to be at their best, and I want to make sure my bench, their bench, is as strong as it can be, and we can sort of take a look holistically, think about who we move around the company, who we accelerate their progress, where we infuse talent, where we may have some gaps. And that's a really important discussion that we have as a management team often, and then we update the board on a very regular basis. In fact, we have an update next week. So I think the important thing is that you're doing the work and it's an ongoing process, and the board has their role in CEO succession, but they have their role in understanding that we have good processes and are doing the right things, and they get some exposure. It's really great for our leaders to get exposure to our board of directors and vice versa as well, because it's important they understand the way we're running the company. They have input on the strategy, the day-to-day, though. It's a great sort of window and view of how that comes to life.
Where are you trying to go with the company? And how do you bring leaders in that can help you get there? And we had great people that, retired or left the organization, but getting that succession right is on the critical path to achieving a real growth strategy for the company, just like CEO succession. And having the right people engaged, having a plan, around when you can have a plan, when around, how you're going to bring those people in, who's going to be involved, I think is incredibly important. We're going through CEO succession now. It's not like it's a secret because we have a mandatory retirement age. And, it's quite a bit more work than people imagine, in terms of, and what's so interesting about it is, I'll use CEO succession, but it can be anybody's. When you make the transition, you really should be starting on the next one then, because you have to move people through the organization. And I think that's to your other point around other, important roles in the organization. Your succession health gets graded as you start to think about bringing other people in the organization, and I think we have some work to do in some areas. I think we've done some great things in others, but I look at that as much about succession health in the company as it is about the candidate that you end up picking. Think about the experiences you want people to have. And, if you're a company that has a exceptional succession track record, you're already thinking about this, so you're moving key people around the organization where they need to be. If you're only average at it, then you starting early is a benefit for you, right? Because you at least got to start thinking about who are those people that, fit the profile, that you can get those right experiences and time it out where, when that other person ends up leaving, retiring or whatever, you've got a person ready. My view is you've got the known, which is a retirement generally, then you have the unknown. The way I think about succession is I want to have succession for the unknown, and I'll always satisfy the known. And that means you've got to have people ready. Great succession to me is, it's not about scrambling to find the right person. When you have great succession, the hardest thing you're doing is telling 2 or 3 people they're not getting the job. That's great succession. That's succession health in an organization. And that's why I think it's so important, because again, as I mentioned, often you have the known, right? But then you have to be ready for the unknown. And that happens as well. And so I'm just a big fan of driving succession in an organization, ensuring that succession pool is diverse, and really forcing people to get varied experiences early in their career. People always ask you, how do you find a successful CEO, P&L person, GM? Everybody uses different words. I said, you have to do it early. You put them in experiences early that they'll have to make decisions on later in their career. And so, sometimes we send people up one specific path and they miss some of the broadening experiences that they need to be successful. And I think that's our fault for not helping them understand the importance of those different types of roles.
In fact, we just did a pretty large redesign of our succession process. So it's kind of fresh in my mind. what we started is really beginning with the expectation that succession and having a deep, diverse succession pool is a business outcome no different than cash flow, revenue, sales, and that it is a leadership accountability. Yes, HR is there and maybe first amongst equals, but this is a business responsibility in setting that expectation. I then think the CHRO and the HR function is really important around what are the principles, how do we want to think about succession? There's a lot of different ways, and so you'll hear a lot of people talk about risk taking on talent and transparency and equity and taking those, and we actually designed 5 principles that we debated deeply with management because they're going to co-own this. So this was going to need to be really important. And then from there, we actually worked the process. And so if you look at kind of the way succession happens, the common language on talent we've been able to develop, what is a hypo, what isn't, right? All of that you can lead and stitch right up into our principles that we established. And it drives, I think, a really good common view of talent. And that is a really important role that I play, I think, in keeping everyone honest and calling it out and calling my peers out if needed. We're saying, well, wait a second, that's not what we talked about, right? And we're not taking a risk here. We're ready, we're ready to take a calculated risk on this high potential talent. Let's do it and understand what support she or he needs at that next level. And so taking those principles, putting them into the process, and then bringing it to life and making that talent conversation not a once a year thing. We actually embedded in our CEO staff meeting once a month. We're always talking about talent, and it's on the agenda. And so those are some things that I think the CHRO and the HR team can drive.
I think CEO succession, just because of the criticality to the company, the deep involvement of the board, the difference that it makes in terms of the next chapter of the company. To me, that's like the highest form of succession, and it's actually one of the most interesting experiences that you can have as an HR leader. But the core principles are just as true for any senior leadership role, and that could be in the C-suite or it could be in the group that reports to them. Leaders make a real difference to companies. And so I think there are a set of principles that we hopefully all believe in and practice around making sure that we've got the right leadership in place based upon the strategy of the company, the values of the company, the team effectiveness, that you're bringing together a highly effective team, not just good individuals in place. That's as true in a CFO succession as it is in a CEO succession. Yeah, I think when you join the C-suite or the senior leadership team of the company, there are 2 or 3 changes that happen, but the most profound change is you're leading a function, but the most important thing is that you're now leading a business. And so do you bring an enterprise perspective, or are you just running your function? All right, so that's the first big change that all of us have needed to figure out as we come into these roles. So our job now is to help our company win, and we can only do that if we think about the whole rather than the individual pieces that we're accountable for. And then being part of a C-suite is no different than any other team that we've been part of. It's not like the rules of nature stop applying. And so the ability to get the right issues on the table, the ability to have a productive conflict around ideas, but to do that in a very kind of respectful, constructive way, the ability to deal with reality. Those things are even more important in the C-suite, and it's just interesting sometimes that I think people forget how important that is, and the attention goes into, do we have the world's best chief legal officer or chief HR officer? Yes, we want that if that's what our strategy requires, but part of being the world's best is that they are great colleagues.
Those roles in our company are elected officer positions. So the board of directors, the Management Development Compensation Committee, elect people at that level. And so ultimately, there is a recommendation approach to the committee that comes from our chairman and CEO. But the development of the slate, the development of the candidates, making sure that we're looking broadly, I spend a lot of time. It's interesting because there are really only two people in the company that can do this. It's the CEO, Mark Sutton, my CEO, and myself. Those, along with the board of directors, that's it. And so by definition, we have to be involved with that. And we take a really broad approach. We have a very strong succeed from within type philosophy. We also have a philosophy that says the best candidate is the one we want. And so in every role, we do internal and external recruiting, and we do assessment processes that are the same for the internal candidates as they are for the external candidates. And so by the end of the process, we know that not only is this person who we're recommending for CFO or for a business leader role, not only are they the best internal candidate, they're the best candidate. And that's really what we want to be able to say to our board, to say, we have done the due diligence, we've done the external scan, we've done everything that we can to make sure that the playing field is absolutely level, and this is the person that we're recommending because they're the best candidate. I would say that the process for the C-suite is probably less intensive than it is for the CEO. We have a CEO age requirement. 65 is mandatory retirement for our CEO. And so that gives you a bracket of time that's automatic. We started, as soon as I got into this role almost 6 years ago, working on CEO succession. And that CEO succession won't happen for another few years yet. So it's a long process, it's intensive, it's iterative with the board. They want to know the candidates, they want to see them in different settings, they want to see them in different leadership roles. And so that CEO succession process it's intense, it's constant, it's something that the board wants to talk about. They see it as their most critical responsibility. That's not to say that the C-suite roles are not critical responsibilities, but just the nature of the CEO job is just so much more demanding.
You just listened to another CHRO conversation. Today we were able to collect the thoughts from 7 CHROs of global businesses. They shared ideas and thoughts about C-suite succession and how strong succession planning can make a substantial difference in the success of organizations. On behalf of all of us, we're associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina. Thank you for joining us.